good afternoon. I am here opening the vlog because it is once again time to return to school. It is time to complete the final freshman semester at Orilium Academy, which will be Autumn Equinox 2022. And I have officially started the first book that I will be reading for this semester. But first, I kind of wanted to go ahead and introduce you to this term and what I will need to be satisfying in order to reach the levels that I need to reach. So if you are not familiar, there are differences between the spring equinox and autumn equinox. With the spring equinox, it's a little bit more relaxed, I would say, in that you're given a handful of classes that you have to take, and once you have read the book for those classes, you have passed them, right? But with autumn equinox, there are different levels that you have to reach for specific subjects. You have ordinary, qualified, and distinguished. So each subject has 3 different levels of classwork, and if you have to reach distinguished in a subject, then you have to read 3 books to pass that subject, if that makes any sense. So for this autumn equinox, I am specifically focusing on 4 subjects. The first subject is alchemy, and I only need to receive an O for ordinary in this subject. And the class for an O is basics of potions. The prompt for that is to read a book on someone's worst list that you think you might like. The next subject is animal studies, and this is the only subject that I actually have to receive a distinguished in. So the class for an ordinary is the study of familiars, to read a book with a familiar or an animal companion. The course for qualified is familiars, ravens, read a book with a raven on the cover or the word raven in the title. And then for distinguished, course is familiars, hares, so read a book with a rabbit on the cover or rabbit in the title. With elemental studies, I also only have to receive an ordinary for the class of element of water, start a book with a drink, and that's literally going to be anything, right? I can start any book with a drink. And then the final subject is restoration, and for restoration, I have to receive a qualified. So the class for ordinary is object restoration. Read a book with a single object as the focus of the cover. And then for qualified, it is enchanted scroll mending. Read one of the oldest books on your TBR. So there are going to be 7 different books that I have to read for this semester. And I do think that this is going to take me a little bit longer to complete because some of the books that I'm reading primarily for animal studies, I think they're all fantasies. So it's going to take me a little while to get through them, especially because you have to read the books in order. So I have to earn the ordinary before I can earn the qualified, before I can earn the distinguished. But as I mentioned, I have already started my first class for this semester. It is actually going to be the one book that I have to read for alchemy. And again, the prompt for that was to read a book on somebody's worst list that you think that you might like. And so in preparation for this, I scoured a bunch of videos of the worst or most disappointing of 2024. And I finally came to one that included a book that was actively on my TBR that I still do really think that I'm going to enjoy. The video that I watched was from Ty's Book Corner, and the book in question is The Reappearance of Rachel Price by Holly Jackson. Holly Jackson is probably one of the only YA authors that I still consistently read. I absolutely adored the A Good Girl's Guide to Murder series, and I also enjoyed 5 Survive, and I've heard really amazing things about the reappearance of Rachel Price, so I still have every confidence that I am going to enjoy this book. I did start this book yesterday on my way home from work, and I have listened to it as I could throughout the day, and Everrand doesn't really give me percentages on my progress, but I would say that based on how much I have left, it is actually a fairly long audiobook. It's like a 16-hour long audiobook, which is quite long for a YA, but I have about 12 hours left, so I would say that I'm at or nearing the 25% mark, and I wanted to give you an update before I got much further into it. But essentially, this follows our main character, Belle Price, and when she was 2 years old, her mother vanished. Belle was found in the back seat of her mother's car on the side of a highway, and nobody ever knew what happened to Rachel Price. In need of money, Belle's dad has actually agreed to a documentary on the disappearance of Rachel Price. And so for a large portion of what I've read so far, we are really diving heavily into the documentary. We have the film crew who are setting up the shots and doing the interviews, and we are learning all about the family and the players and the context through all of the interviews that are happening for the documentary, which I think is really cool. And of course, as per the title of the book, Rachel Price actually does reappear. And she tells Charlie and Belle that she was held captive in somebody's basement for 16 years. She doesn't know where she was held. She doesn't know who held her because she never really saw his face. And she was kind of left on her own with no TV, no books, nothing for 16 years. I'm sure that you can imagine how incredibly awkward and uncomfortable that is for everybody involved, right? Especially Belle, who never really knew her mother. She was only 2 when her mother disappeared. And so she's lived almost her whole life without her mother, and she was basically fine with it. You know, she had accepted that her mother was gone and was never coming back. And in some ways, I do feel like Belle is resentful, almost as if she blames her mother for leaving, because I think in some ways, Belle did think that her mother chose to run away and up and leave, and then maybe something bad happened to her. I'm not sure, but she really doesn't have the best attitude when it comes to her mother or life in general. She's very much, I'm gonna hurt you before you hurt me, or I'm gonna push you away before you push me away. You know what I mean? So obviously her mother's disappearance has had a really big effect on how she approaches life and how she lives her life. And now her mother mother is back, and Belle is really suspicious. She does not believe that her mother is being truthful. She believes that her mother is hiding something and that there is something weird going on. And it doesn't help that her mother is almost immediately trying to reinstate herself within the mom role. Like, she's trying to figure out who Belle is, what she likes, and all of that stuff. And she's doing so in a way that feels a little bit intrusive, a little bit invasive, right? She's overly curious, which, I mean, I guess you could expect for a mom who hasn't seen her kid in 16 years since she was a toddler. But at the same time, it is making Belle feel very, very uneasy. And at the same time, you know, her dad is not handling this well either. He doesn't seem to be reacting to Rachel's return like Belle thought that he would. He's not overjoyed and emotional and hugging and loving on Rachel. He's very distant. He's very reserved. I don't know. It felt a little bit fast, in my opinion, the way that she just kind of shows up and she starts talking to Belle and Charlie and answering all of their questions before even getting the police involved. And then they spend the night with the police, and then Rachel's back home living with them. And I'm just like, this is just a little bit weird. And I do think that Holly Jackson is doing a really great job of portraying that weirdness and that awkwardness. She's doing that very well. So I'm going to trust Holly Jackson, and I'm going to see where it goes. So I'm having a really great time with this. I'm just like not emotionally connected to it or anything like that. So we're going to see. But anyway, I have some things that I'm going to try to take care of before my husband gets home. I also have some bookish mail, which I will unbox and show you in just a second. And I will come on here and update you when I've actually finished the reappearance of Rachel Price.
Everyone's running like they stole a dream. Images of magazines. Take your chance while you're still young. Glory flickers like a candle in the desert sun.
Good morning, my friends. I am here because I have officially finished the reappearance of Rachel Price by Holly Jackson, and I wanted to come on here and share my thoughts because holy cow, I absolutely loved that book. I would say that the reappearance of Rachel Price is a very solid mystery thriller blend. It's ultimately obviously surrounding the mystery of Rachel Price, first her disappearance and then her reappearance. And it's following our main character, Belle, as she is trying to uncover the lies that she thinks her mother is telling about her disappearance and why she has suddenly reappeared. So you have Belle trying to investigate that mystery. And then part of the way through, her dad suddenly goes missing and everybody thinks he's run away, but she doesn't believe it. So there's also another mystery thrown in. But this is also solidly thriller as well because you don't know what's coming next. You are figuring things out with Belle, connecting those dots, and you know that there is some sense of danger. There is something going to happen and people's lives could be at risk if this is not solved. So this is such a solid blend of mystery thriller, and this was so much more solid than many of the adult mysteries or thrillers that I have read in recent years. I found this book to be so incredibly compelling. I just wanted to keep turning the pages. I wanted to have the answers. I wanted to know what was going to happen. And I thought that everything came together so well. And I'm so impressed every single time I read a Holly Jackson because she's just phenomenal about crafting a story like this. And that's why I'm really glad to know that she's coming out with her first adult novel, because if this is what she can do with a young adult, I am very, very excited to see what she can do with an adult. I am so incredibly pleased with my reading experience of this story. And I think that this is honestly my new favorite Holly Jackson. I think that this beats out the A Good Girl's Guide to Murder series for sure, because that's how solid I thought that this story was. Now, do you have to suspend your disbelief a little bit? Yes, absolutely. But for the most part, I feel like a lot of it was pretty plausible. What ultimately ended up getting unbelievable was like near the end, it kind of wrapped up and cleaned up a little bit too nicely. And I think that if you have read this, you will probably know what I'm talking about. But I loved this. I think I might settle on a 4.5 stars. I think I might need to take a step away from it for a little while to ultimately decide on my rating. But I have just been thinking about this nonstop. Like, I continue to think that I'm going to go and pick it up again to read more of it, but it's done. It's over. And I don't want it to be over. And I think that's a really good sign of a great book. So right now I'm settling on like a 4.5, and this was just an amazing reading experience. Hi friends. So it is actually later the same day, and I'm here with a very impromptu update because I was not expecting to start the next book for this project until tomorrow, which is June 1st, the start of the Amazing Readathon. And I knew that no matter what prompt came about for the Amazing Readathon, I was going to be able to satisfy the prompt for this project of starting a book with a dream. But when I finished the reappearance of Rachel Price, it kind of left me without an audiobook that I could just listen to as I wanted to. And I didn't want to really start something that could potentially take me several days to finish, especially because I knew the Amazing Readathon was starting. However, luckily, my Hold for Worst Case Scenario by TJ Newman came in from the library. And this is the book that I was going to use to satisfy the ordinary level for the restoration subject. And the prompt for that is to read a book where there is just a sole object as the focus focus on the cover. And worst case scenario is definitely that. It is an airplane. That is the focus of the cover. And so this is actually going to be a very quick, fast-paced read, just as all TJ Newman books are. If you're not familiar, TJ Newman used to be a flight attendant, and so all of her thrillers are really based on plane tragedies. And this book is only 8 hours total of listening time, so about 4 hours or less on the speed at which I listen to audiobook. And so even if I don't finish it today, because I don't think I will, I'm still trying to finish Rebel Witch, which I'm also kind of listening to on audio and reading physically. I know that I'm going to be able to easily fly through this tomorrow, no pun intended. So I thought it would be a good idea for me to just go ahead and pick it up since my library hold came in, and that's exactly what I did. And I've been listening to it for just under an hour now, and I'm already at the 20% mark. And because of that, I'm definitely getting through this at an incredibly quick pace. I do plan on listening to it a little bit more today, and so I know that the next time I'm able to update you about this story, I'm going to be done with it. So I wanted to come on here and just introduce the book. But just like her past books, this follows a plane tragedy, and this is actually following one on a much wider scale because it follows a plane that crashes into a nuclear reactor. So just as with all TJ Newman books, she throws you right into the action. There really is no time to adjust to what is happening. So this story on page 1 follows the pilot of the plane in question having a heart attack and instantly dying. And when he does this, his body falls onto the throttle and pushing the plane into a nosedive. And his co-pilot is actually in the restroom at the time, and he hits his head when this all happens. And so there's nobody there to fly the plane. Naturally, that has devastating consequences with 295 souls on board. But what's worse than that, of course, is that the plane lands on a nuclear reactor, and everybody is rushing, trying to figure out what the consequences of this is going to be. What is going to happen now that this plane has fallen onto a nuclear reactor? So we're following a lot of the people who are involved, like who manage the nuclear plant. They're briefing the president, they're telling him what's going on, and it's just a very intense, quick, fast-paced time, just as all of TJ Newman's books are. And so again, that's why I really just wanted to come on here and give you a quick update, because I know that I'm going to get through this very, very fast. And so far, I'm having a grand old time. Anyway, I wanted to just introduce the book, tell you that I'm really enjoying it so far, and I should have a final update for you by tomorrow when I finish it.
Wasted time on an overpass, watching how nothing lasts. The streets are filled with a hollow glow, the bellies ache.
Hello friends. So it is actually Monday afternoon, so it's a couple days later, and I apologize if I'm looking like a hot mess. I honestly made no attempt to look presentable today. My grad course started today, and I woke up and I was just like, you know what? I just want to throw on clothes and get started with the day. I spent most of my day at work in between doing work things, doing grad school things. And so now I'm here actually finally updating you, because I believe my last update I mentioned that I was starting Worst Case Scenario by TJ Newman because I needed something to listen to, and I knew I was going to be able to fly through it really quickly. But I vastly overestimated my ability to listen to an audiobook on a Sunday when I knew that I was going to be spending a solid portion of the day filming and editing. And so because of that, it took me almost all day yesterday to get through Worst Case Scenario, because I had so many other things that I had to do that wouldn't allow me to listen to an audiobook. So I actually didn't even finish Worst Case Scenario, unfortunately, until about 5 o'clock in the evening yesterday when I was making dinner. And by that point, I just was not in a place where I could actually sit down and film an update or anything like that. And I was already almost a day behind in the amazing Readathon, which is not how you want to start out. So I wanted to come on here and close out my thoughts and feelings on Worst Case Scenario. And I also wanted to talk about the next book that I'm reading for this vlog, which is The Missing Half by Ashley Flowers, because I was able to start that last night with some water that I was drinking. And I also listened to it more this morning while I was drinking my coffee. So that's going to satisfy the prompt that I needed to fulfill for this round at Orilium of starting a book with a drink. So Worst Case Scenario. I don't know what she puts in these books, but I absolutely love them. And by the end of the story, I was getting emotional. I was getting choked up and teary-eyed. And that is really, really unusual for me in a book like this that is so fast-paced and plot-driven, and where you have so many different character perspectives. You're not spending any significant length of time with them. Like, this is definitely not a book where you are supposed to emotionally connect with the characters. You know what I mean? That's not the point of the story. But because of the the intensity of these stories. This book is seriously high stakes, and because it's high stakes, it is incredibly intense. And so because of that intensity, I was so tense while I was reading this story yesterday. Anytime I was able to pick up the audiobook when I was doing laundry or some other chores and I was listening to it, it just put me in this really on edge frame of mind because the stakes were so incredibly high. I think I mentioned in my introductory clip that this follows a plane crash as it crashes into a nuclear reactor in a small town in Minnesota, and they are essentially trying to keep this plant from exploding and from having all this nuclear waste released everywhere and vast amounts of radiation being leaked into the atmosphere. And it was set to be an event that was going to be like as bad as, if not worse than, Chernobyl, so this was a really, really big deal. TJ Newman does a really, really great job of making you feel that intensity when you are reading the stories. And I think that she is the only author who writes stories like this who has been able to make me feel something by the end of the story with the characters. It was the same with Drowning too. I started to get pretty emotional by the end of that book, and I almost had tears running down my face at the end of this one, which is amazing. Despite all that, I really can't give it more than a 4 stars because I know that after a couple of weeks, I'm really not going to remember the finer points of the story, especially because since it centers around nuclear power, there definitely was a lot of engineering talk in here that certainly went right over my head. The fact that it does get a 4 star is pretty amazing just based on what the story is. So I highly, highly recommend TJ Newman if you have never read from her before. But like I said, I was actually able to start The Missing Half by Ashley Flowers last night. This is actually a really, really quick read as well. It's almost basically the same length as Worst Case Scenario. So it's something that's really easy to fly through. But because I spent so much time today doing grad school work, I didn't really have much of an opportunity to listen. So I'm not going to actually finish it today, which is just fine. I will absolutely be finishing it tomorrow and we'll call it a day. Essentially, this follows our main character, Nicole. And about 7 years prior to the start of the story, her older sister, Casey, disappeared one day from her car on the side of the road, and nobody was able to determine what happened to her. And since then, she's just kind of been stuck. She's worked the same dead-end job at this children's fun place for the past 8 years. She's kind of a little bit of an alcoholic, or at the very least, she abuses alcohol because she just got her license suspended for a DWI. She's kind of at a standstill, and even though she doesn't try to think about Casey, she tries not to think about Casey because all the emotions it brings up, it obviously has kind of stunted her life. And one day she is leaving work and she's approached by this random stranger, and she finds out that this stranger is Jenna, and her sister actually went missing prior to Casey's disappearance. And so even though there really is no proof that the two disappearances were related, it was really unusual for this small town in Indiana to have 2 randomly missing girls, fairly young girls. Casey was 19 and I think the other one was in her early 20s or something like that. And so their cases were at least tangentially connected to each other, and so they had a lot of notoriety. And so Jenna has approached Nicole because she wants to look into their sister's disappearance. She thinks that they are connected, and she thinks that if they work together, they can figure out what actually happened to their sister. And so it's really all about just their investigation. And again, I am enjoying the writing, I'm enjoying the vibes, and I'm just kind of here for the journey. This is my Patreon book club pick, and so I absolutely had to get it read. It's also satisfying something for the amazing Readathon, for my monthly TBR game, all of that good stuff. So it's going to check a lot of boxes. And I'm honestly not mad that it's something that I'm easily able to fly through, because I think that's just what I need right now, especially since my next read is going to be a little bit more on the literary historical fiction side. And mentally, I'm not sure how I feel about that. So I'm just kind of enjoying this one while I'm reading it. So like I said, will not finish it today. Most likely I will likely finish it tomorrow, but as soon as I do, I will come on here and wrap up my final thoughts.
A shallow hunger grows. Don't rush me, I just want a little more time. Everyone grows older, we all just want to start again.
Hello friends, good afternoon. I'm coming on here to wrap up my final thoughts on The Missing Half by Ashley Flowers. Finished it the other day, but because I didn't immediately jump into the next book for this project, I almost forgot to give you an update. I thought it was a solid sophomore novel from Ashley Flowers. This was a story that I was compelled to read from start to finish. It was one of those stories that was quick, not just in terms of its length, but just in terms of how it read. You know what I mean? It's one of those page turners where you just want to know what is going to happen. You want to solve the mystery. This is one of those stories where if I had put it down down and walked away from it. I would have gone back to it even if I hadn't been having a good reading experience, just because I would want to know the answer. And so I think that alone is indicative of how strong I felt the story was. Was it anything crazy mind-blowing or unique? No, but at the same time, I didn't necessarily see the twist in this coming. Now, this story was not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. There were some times where I feel like you have to suspend your disbelief, because I feel like Ashley Flowers was taking the stereotype of small town police force incompetence to the next level in this. There are certain things in here that these sisters were able to discover pretty quickly, pretty easily, that I feel like this police force would have had to do absolutely nothing in order to not uncover. And it kind of happened like that throughout the story. I do feel like these sisters were easily able to uncover information after 7 years that the police force was not able to uncover, but ultimately that didn't really dampen my reading experience of this, right? Like, I still had a really, really great time. I do think it was a strong sophomore novel from Ashley Flowers, and it is something that I would recommend. I'm debating on whether this is going to be like a 3.5 or a 4 stars, because I do think that this is a memorable read. Like, I don't think that everything is going to escape me after a couple of weeks, but I don't necessarily know if I want to give it a 4 star. Yeah, I'm gonna have to sit with it for a little while. Ultimately, I'm very, very pleased with my reading experience of this. Now, when am I going to start the next book in this project? I have no idea. Because we're currently in the autumn equinox, I have to read books in order. So I can't just read a book for distinguished if I haven't finished the ordinary prompt. And the main classes that I need to satisfy are animal studies. The first book that I plan on reading for the ordinary is going to be Dungeon Crawler Carl, and I can't read that until it's time to read it for the Amazing Readathon, because I haven't satisfying an Amazing Readathon prompt. So I don't know ultimately how long it's going to take me to get through autumn equinox of 2022, but that is okay. We have time to get all of this done. All that to say, I will see you when I see you.
Sometimes the waves, they keep on crashing in. Sometimes the rain, it never seems to end. I'll be alright, my friend, if you stay by my side.
Good morning, friends. Do you remember how in my last clip I said I didn't know when I was going to be back to update you with the next book in this vlog project? That was entirely going to depend on what prompts dropped for the Amazing Readathon. Well, as it turns out, shortly after I filmed that clip, the next prompt dropped, and it was to read a book with an over-the-top cover, and for that I had selected Dungeon Crawler Carl by Matt Dinneman, and that was the next book that I needed to read for this project so that I could move on in animal studies. The first prompt that I needed to satisfy to reach the ordinary level was to read a book with an animal companion or animal familiar, and this definitely has that. So this is a wild and crazy book, y'all. It is basically a lit RPG, and I'm going to try my best to summarize what this is actually about. At the beginning of the story, we meet Carl. He is 27-year-old ex-military. He has just recently gone through a breakup with his girlfriend, who he found out was cheating on him, and he still has hold of her Persian cat named Princess Donut, who is like an award-winning show cat. And at the start of the book, it is the middle of the night. It's like 2:30 in the morning. He can't sleep. He cracks the window to smoke, and for the first time ever, Princess Donut decides she wants to explore the outside, so she runs outside. And naturally, Carl has to go chase her, and he is essentially in nothing but like a leather jacket, his boxers, and some pink Crocs left over from his girlfriend. So he is definitely not prepared for the really cold weather. It's like January in Seattle. And all of a sudden, the transformation happens, otherwise known as a collapse. And essentially all structures on Earth that like have a roof are essentially gone, vaporized. And this includes cars, airplanes, tents, and basically everybody who was within those structures is presumed dead. And immediately after this happens, a big AI produced announcement goes to every surviving member on Earth. And I want to briefly read you some of this announcement video so you can kind of understand everything that's happening here, because I don't know if I could do it justice, honestly. This says, surviving humans take note. Per syndicate rules, subsection 543 of the Precious Elemental Reserves Code, having failed to file a proper appeal for mineral and elemental rights within 50 solars of first contact, your planet has been successfully seized and is currently being mined of all requested elemental deposits by the assigned planetary regent. Every interior of your world has been crushed, and all raw materials, organic and inanimate, are in the process of being mined for the requested elements. Any surviving humans will be given the opportunity to reclaim their lost matter. The Borant Corporation, having been assigned regency over the solar system, is allowed to choose the manner of this reclamation, and they have chosen option 3, also known as the 18-level world dungeon. The Borant Corporation retains all rights to broadcast, exploit, and otherwise control all aspects of the world dungeon, and will remain in control as long as they adhere adhere to syndicate regulations regarding world resource reclamation. Upon successful completion of level 18 of the world dungeon, regency of this planet will revert to the successor. It said the first level of this dungeon will open approximately 18 seconds after the end of this announcement. The first level entrances will open for exactly 1 human hour and 1 hour only. Once the entrances are closed, you may no longer enter. If you enter, you may not leave until you have either completed all 18 levels of the world dungeons or if you meet certain other requirements. If you choose not to enter the world dungeon, you will have to sustain yourself upon the service of your planet, and this may be the last communication you receive during your lifetime. And again, it goes into more in detail about what to expect in the dungeons and everything like that. So essentially what we come to find out is that the transformation was caused by the Syndicate, and the Syndicate is essentially the unified galaxy system, and it contains about like 3 billion independent star systems. Thousands of years ago, when the pyramids were being developed on Earth, the Borant Corporation was assigned as the regent of Earth. Nobody claimed ownership of Earth, basically, right? And so Borant has essentially asserted their right to all of the resources on Earth, and now in the present day, they are coming to collect. And that is what is happening here. They are mining all of the resources on Earth. They have to give humans the right to reclaim those resources, and that is where the dungeon comes in. Like, if you successfully pass the dungeons, the humans will be able to reclaim their rights to Earth. And so we follow Carl as he's entering the dungeons and all of the stuff that he is encountering, and it's quite complicated, right? It is a lit RPG, so you're following all the battles that he has to go through, the skill levels, the items he's collecting for his inventory, all of the rules associated with the dungeon. And throughout this, you're getting a bunch of like different AI announcements during the game. You're also learning all about the items that he's collecting. And I will just say that if you have the opportunity to listen to this via audio, you absolutely have to, or you need to listen to it and read it with your eyeballs, because the audiobook narrator is phenomenal. And I don't know if I would be having as great of an experience without this audiobook narrator, because he is so great and he's really getting into it. This is definitely like an action-packed story. It is one thing after another after another. You are not stopping, because basically in this dungeon, each level is only open for a certain number of days. And once that number of days has passed, the level collapses. And if you have not made it down to the next level, you are essentially dead. You are no longer able to participate. So there's definitely a time crunch going on here. And we're following Carl and Donut, who has joined him in this dungeon, as they are trying to survive. And it is hilarious, y'all. I was only on chapter 7 of this book when I was laughing hysterically to the point I was crying. I had to pause the book because I could not take in any further information because I was laughing so hard that I was crying. So this is certainly an entertaining time. It is a fun time. I will say that it is a little bit difficult to kind of keep track of everything, just because they are, you know, opening all of these boxes with all of this loot, and they're obtaining all of these skills, and you can't necessarily keep track of everything that they're collecting, all of the skills that they're gaining, all of the rules of the dungeon. So in some ways that's a little bit difficult, but that is just my brain. I'm sure other people don't have the same problem with it. And I assume it would be a little bit different if I was actually reading this with my eyeballs, but I am not. I'm only listening to it. So some of the stuff is going right over my head. That's not the fault of the story or the author. That is just a me thing, but I'm still having an incredibly great time with this. And obviously Princess Donut is perfection and I'm enjoying myself. I can understand the hype. I understand why everybody loves this. And I think that I would probably just be willing to continue just because of the experience, even if I don't necessarily like connect to anything that's happening, even if it doesn't become like a new favorite. I think that I can see myself just continuing with the story because of how damn entertaining it is. So again, really loving this. I will be finishing it, if not today, by tomorrow, and I will be able to come on and give you more of my thoughts at that time. I don't necessarily know if I'm going to have very much more thoughts about it, but I will come on here when I've officially finished that book.
Sometimes our worries get the best of us. Sometimes the hardest we try is not enough. All will be well as long as you stay by my side. You help me take this weight off my shoulders. Always run my way when I call you. You're the anchor I'm holding tight on to. You are my home away from home. I wonder if the sun will shine. Some days I pray for just a ray of light. Come take my hand and tell me you'll stay by my side. Some days I feel like I'm against the wall. Some days I feel I'm barely holding on. All will be well.
Hello everyone, I did it. I finished Dungeon Crawler Carl last night and I really enjoyed it. I had such a fun time with this. It is an absolute wild but fun ride. Princess Donut is the star of the show. It is action-packed, it is fast-paced, it'll keep the pages turning, and I just really enjoyed my reading experience of it. I will absolutely be continuing in this series just because I think it's going to be an amazing palate cleanser. It's not something that I have to think too terribly hard about. It's something that I could put on and just kind of vibe with. So I gave this a solid 4 stars and I'm really looking forward to continuing with the series. Now, for the moment, we are at a standstill with this project because the other 3 books that I need to read for this are actually fantasies. And while I will be able to start getting to those soon-ish, I am currently working on another reading project that does require me to read 2 fantasies. And I feel like I'm already kind of falling behind on that project a little bit. I'm not as prompt with it as I want to be. And so I feel like I need to prioritize those 2 fantasies before I can start prioritizing the fantasies for this. I don't know when I'm going to be able to continue this project. It is definitely still a priority. I want to get it read as soon as possible, but it just kind of worked out where the books that I need to read for these are all like chunky fantasies. And while I'm in grad school, I can only focus on one of those at a time. If I wasn't in grad school, I would also have one going at work. I'd have one going at home right before bed, but that is just not how it is. Anyway, I'm completely rambling at this point. I just wanted to say that, when you see me, it's only going to be a couple of seconds, but I think for me, it's going to be a couple of weeks until I see you again. But for right now, we're still making good progress on our Orilium goal. I've really been enjoying the books that I'm reading for this project, and I am excited to continue. So I will see you when I see you. Everyone. Wow, between the morning light and this dark lipstick, I am looking a little bit like a vampire, but it's fine. We're gonna roll with it. I am getting ready to head out to work, but I wanted to take a moment and update you because I have finally started the next class for Orilium. It's been a couple of weeks. I believe the last update I gave you was on Dungeon Crawler Carl, and that was in early June. We are now nearing the end of June, and I'm finally able to start the next book. And the class that I'm going to be studying for is another animal studies class. This one is going to be focused on familiars. And so to pass this class, I have to read a book with a raven on the cover or raven in the title. And thankfully, shortly before I realized I was going to be reading this prompt, I heard about a book called The Raven Scholar by Antonia Hodgson. And I'm so thankful that I did because after looking into this further, I literally had nothing else on my radar that would have satisfied this prompt. And a lot of the books that would have satisfied this prompt, I had already read or I was not interested in. So I'm really thankful that this came along when it did. I was able to snag a beautiful Illumicrate edition from Pango once I heard about it. And I would say that I'm just now about at the 30% mark. This is quite a chunky fantasy. It is about 640 pages and I'm about 223 pages into it. So I have somewhat of a decent idea of what is happening. So this is set in the Empire of Iran, and the society of this empire is essentially based around 8 guardians. And these guardians are kind of like animal deities, and each of the animal deities has its own specialization, right? So for example, the raven, they are the scholarly types. So their monastery is the one that produces the historians and the lawyers and things of that nature. And so at the beginning of the story, we are introduced to the Valet family. It is a mom and her 3 children, including twins Rugo and Yana. They have just turned 16 and they have been called in front of the emperor. Now, what's important to know about this family is that their father was a traitor. I believe he started a rebellion or he tried to usurp the emperor. They were both in the competition for the throne, and the dad came in like second, and then something went down and he was a traitor to the empire. And the Valets have been under the emperor's protection up until this point. And so the emperor calls them in front of him and says, I don't believe that children should be punished for the sins of their father. I'm willing to give you a chance to be somebody in this empire. And he looks at Yana and he says, I've heard a lot of great things about you. We would love to have you in the Tiger Monastery. And the Tiger Monastery basically equips the warriors of this land. And this is not really something that Yana wants. She has no interest in being a warrior or potentially ruling someday. That's her brother's dream. But she's going to go ahead and accept it when her brother outs a secret of Yana's and essentially betrays her. And when he does this, he gets to seat in the Tiger Monastery. But not only that, he sentences his sister to exile. And basically what this means is that her name and memory are going to be be wiped from the slate. You're never going to be able to talk about her again. She's going to be tossed to some distant harsh land. And so essentially she is expected to die fairly quickly. And I'm mentioning all of this because it is at this point where we meet the main character of the story, Nima Kra, who at this time is a novice scholar in the Emperor's Palace. And she is asked to write the Order of Exile. And she has trepidations about this, as does her boyfriend at the time, Cain. Nima recognizes what she's being asked to do and that this could be a really big boost to her career. And she knows that if she doesn't do it, somebody else is going to do it. So she goes ahead and does it. Fast forward 8 years, Nima is currently the high scholar in the Empire. She's like one of the Emperor's right-hand people. And she's not really well-liked at all. She doesn't have any friends. A lot of people find her insufferable. She is definitely a know-it-all. Like, she cannot help correct you if you say something incorrectly. But she is the high scholar, and it is currently time for the Emperor to step down. They are only allowed to rule for up to 24 years, and if they don't step down prior to that point, by the 24th year, they are essentially forced to. And then what's called a Festival of the Eight happens, and that's a competition where a contender from each of the monasteries tries to vie for the throne through trials, essentially. And Nima Kra, as one of her last acts as the high scholar, is organizing this event. We are at the day of the first trial, and so we have met the contenders who are going to be vying for the throne, and one of them includes Cain. This is like the first time that they've interacted in 8 years. Another one of the contenders is Ruko Valet. He is going to be the contender from the Tiger Monastery, and so a lot of things are coming up about what he did to his sister. So you have all of the contenders, and we are at the first day of the trial when the contender for the Raven Monastery is found brutally murdered. And Nima herself, she is actually tasked with the Emperor to try to solve Gaia's murder, but also she is told that she is going to be the new Raven contender. And this throws her for a loop, right? Because she's not a contender. She hasn't been training for years for this. She does not know if she is even capable of being a contender and going through all the trials that they are going to be required to do. So she has to be a legitimate contender, and she also has to try to figure out who killed Gaia. And I'm actually having a really, really decent time with this. I have been enjoying this from pretty much start to finish. I am really intrigued by the overall premise and concept of the story, and I'm definitely liking the world and the world building. I always love when I get a fair bit of the world and the contextual elements, because I feel like it helps me understand what is happening, and I'm not so mired in confusion that I'm not able to actually understand the story, right? So we understand about the 8 animal deities, we understand their specializations and their monasteries, and who the contenders are and what their motivations are and everything like that. So I really, really appreciate that we are given all of that information. So like I said, I'm really enjoying the writing. I'm really enjoying the setup of the story. I will probably try to check in with you around the 60% mark. Hopefully I have a little bit more thoughts and opinions on the story. And then of course I will come on and check in with you once I've actually finished. But so far I am enjoying it. I'm having a great time. Good afternoon, everyone. I am here with some quick updates because I have made some reading progress. I am nearing the 50% mark into The Raven Scholar, and I have actually started the next book for the Autumn Equinox 2022. It is going to satisfy the final animal studies prompt, which also focuses on familiars, but this time it is rabbit. And so I have to read a book with a rabbit on the cover or in the title. And for this, I selected Hellbent by Leigh Bardugo, which is literally the only book that I had on my TBR that would satisfy this prompt. Works out perfectly because it's been like 2.5 years since I read Ninth House. So it was more than time for me to get to this. And I'm so glad that I did, because you ever like pick up a book and you instantly know from page 1 that this is the book that you were supposed to be reading in this moment. That is how I felt when I picked up Hellbent, because it was just like giving me life. It's probably because it's very much dark academia-esque, and it's kind of giving me all of the fall vibes that I'm longing for right now. I hate the summer, y'all. It makes me so tired and cranky, especially here in the South with the ramped up humidity. And so I'm just longing for fall, and Hellbent is giving me all the vibes that I want. Now, I am not going to be able to tell you much about Hellbent because it's a direct sequel to Ninth House, and I feel like anything I told you about the plot of Hellbent would be a spoiler to things that happened in Ninth House, but I can give you a quick rundown about what Ninth House is. This follows our main character, Galaxy Alex Stern, and at the start of the story, she's going through some difficult things. She's a high school dropout, she's a drug survivor, she's also the survivor of a mass murder, and she wakes up in the hospital after this mass murder event, and she is approached by somebody from Yale with the opportunity for a second chance. Now, something to note about Alex is that she can see grays, basically ghosts, and the people from Yale know this about her, and they want her for a very specific purpose. So they tell her, we will give you a full scholarship, a full ride to Yale, but what you have to do is come and help Lethe House. Lethe is the 9th house, and they are kind of like the regulatory house over the 8 other occult societies, secret societies that Yale has. And basically their job is to make sure that these other societies, when they're doing their rituals, don't get out of hand. If I remember correctly, one of the main reasons is because grays oftentimes interfere with these rituals, and things can go very dangerous dangerously awry. And so because Alex can actually see these grays, they think that she's going to be a really big help in preventing anything dangerous from happening in the rituals. And so she heads to New England to go to Yale and be part of Lethe. You're following her training under a man named Darlington, who is her immediate superior, but something actually happens to Darlington early on in the story and he disappears and nobody knows where he is. And Alex is trying to find Darlington, but also she finds herself getting wrapped up in a murder mystery because a local girl has gone missing and it actually appears like magic might have been involved. So she thinks that there's something far bigger going on. So she is trying to solve this murder mystery, uncover what's really going on at Yale. And at the same time, she's having to deal with something that happened in her past with regard to that mass murder. So she's literally dealing with the ghosts of her past, both figuratively and literally. And I just loved Ninth House. I had a great time with it. Now, with regard to the Raven Scholar, as I mentioned, I am almost 50% of the way through and I am really enjoying it. But I think that I'm doing a disservice to this book because I have been feeling pretty slumpy lately, not even necessarily with regard to my reading, but with regard to life. There are certain life things that are making me feel slumpy and that's affecting my reading. But also, this is the book that I'm reading in bed before I go to sleep. And I feel like lately I haven't had as much time to read before bed as I want because I'm doing other things. I have other things going on. And so I'm only reading like 15 pages here and there. And I don't think that's really enough time for me to really get involved in the world. When I am involved, I am really enjoying it. I like the world building. I like what is happening. I am certainly intrigued, but there's nothing currently connecting me to the story. There's nothing that's pulling me towards reading it. So I can easily set it down and I can walk away from it and I cannot think of it again. It's a very disjointed reading experience. And I really think it's a me thing. It's not a book thing. So I don't want to blame the book for any kind of negative reading experience I'm having with this. I will say that I do think that this is probably a little bit too long for what it is. I think that if it had been maybe 100 pages shorter, it would be better paced because like I said, we are nearing the 50% mark and we've only gotten to the first trial. You know what I mean? Now, technically I am cheating just a little bit because Hellbent is the final book that I need to read to reach Distinguished in Animal Studies. So I'm supposed to finish the Raven Scholar first, but because I feel like this round of Orilium is taking me a lot longer because of the chunky fantasies that I'm reading and I still have one chunky fantasy to get through before I can complete this round, I wanted to make myself feel like I was making progress. And so I did go ahead and start Hellbent and I feel like it's okay because I am 50% of the way into the Raven Scholar and I hope to make more progress on that this weekend. And so hopefully I will be finishing both of the stories closely together. That's probably when I'm going to be coming on here to give you the next update. Like I said, I'm not going to be able to tell you too terribly much about Hellbent just because it is a sequel. I'm not going to be able to give you much information about that. So I'm probably going to wait and come on here and update you when I've actually finished both of the stories. So I will check in with you then. Good morning, everyone. I am actually in the process of getting ready for work, but while it's kind of quiet and I'm on my own, I wanted to take a minute to update you because as promised, I have now finished both Hellbent and the Raven Scholar, so I wanted to go ahead and give you an update before I moved on to the final book for this round of Orilium, which I still don't know what it's going to be. We'll get to that in just one second. But as I mentioned in the previous clip, there's not too terribly much I can tell you about Hellbent because it is a direct sequel to Ninth House, and a lot of what happens in Hellbent is because of the events in Ninth House, and I don't really want to risk any spoilers, but I still stand by what I said with regard to the vibes. It was giving me all of the dark academia fall vibes, and I was absolutely living for it. I really enjoyed the story from start to finish. There was kind of a new foe introduced in Hellbent, and I'm looking forward to how that progresses in the series. So I'm really glad that this actually pushed me to get to it because it has been quite a long time since I read Ninth House, and it's kind of one of those situations where the longer you go without reading the series, you wonder if you want to continue even if you did really enjoy the first book. And so I'm thankful that I was able to read the second book and determine that yes, I absolutely do want to continue. And with regard to the Raven Scholar, I am honestly not sure how I feel about that story. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to articulate how I feel. I feel like I had a really disjointed reading experience with this. Now that is through no fault of the book at all, right? Because first of all, there was several days when I was feeling really slumpy. I wasn't gravitating towards reading pretty much anything, and I was reading this during that time. With that being said, I do feel like this was way longer than it needed to be. I feel like if it had been cut by at least 100 pages, it would have flowed much better. It would have been better paced. There would not have been dragging within the story. So in that regard, I do think that that is an equal combination of a me thing and a book thing. Also, I really do feel like this book was trying to do a lot because as I mentioned, we definitely have the trials going on for the Emperor, and we also have this murder mystery. And in my opinion, the trials took a back seat to the murder mystery, which is not necessarily a problem, but if you are going into the story thinking thinking that you are going to have a lot of these epic trials, you're going to be disappointed. And I do feel like if we had gotten more trials, if I felt the stakes of the trials, it would have been more interesting. But this was more focused on the murder mystery, and part of the murder mystery involved the whole politics of the world, the kingdom, and the impending new emperor. And I actually thought that that was quite fascinating. So I wasn't necessarily disappointed that they were focusing more on the murder mystery, but because you have the murder mystery, you have all the politics going on, you have all the trials going on, and on top of that, you are actually getting another perspective in here periodically, and it is of the raven itself. So the animal guardian, the raven, Nima's guardian. And the raven added, in a lot of ways, a little bit of comedy to the situation going on. There was a little bit of comic relief going on with the raven's perspective. So I do think that there was a lot going on, and I was never able to really fully connect with any one thing. There also were, of course, a lot of characters to keep track of, because you have all of the 8 contestants, you have their contingents, you have the emperor and the people who are supporting the emperor. You have a lot of people that you are trying to keep track of. And so it definitely got bogged down within all of that. I never emotionally connected to the characters in the story or anything that was happening in it. But yet at the same time, I was really intrigued to find out what was happening. I thought that this was well written. I thought it was a very, very unique world. So when I was reading it, I was in it. But when I was away from it, I wasn't thinking about it. I didn't really care to ever pick it up again. You know what I mean? I could have walked away from the story and probably never thought about it again. And so that's why I say this was a really disjointed reading experience. So it took me a long time to read, and I was never emotionally invested or connected to it. But at the same time, I had a good time. I do think that I am intrigued enough to continue with it. I'm just not entirely sure how I feel about this particular reading experience. Now, when I mentioned earlier, I should only have one book to finish this round of Orilium, August 2022. And the prompt that I needed to satisfy is to read one of the oldest books on my TBR. And that's a little bit hard for me to determine because my want to read list on Goodreads is not 100% accurate, because I redid it back in like 2022. And so all of these books were re-added onto it in 2022. So I don't actually know what was there first or anything, because they were all added at the same time. So naturally, when I went there, I was looking for all of the books that had been added in 2022. And one of the only ones that was still there was Kings of the Wild by Nicholas Eames. So I wasn't really happy about going into another chunky fantasy, especially since I wanted to try to get this done. But I went ahead, I picked it up. I got about 50 pages into it when I realized that I just don't necessarily know if this is my type of fantasy. It is about a band of mercenaries. They have been disbanded for a while, like 20 years. You know, they're aging. They're not as physically fit as they once were, but they have to go on a rescue mission for one of the members' daughters. And this is definitely going to be like a journey book as they are traveling from their location to where this daughter is, and all of the trials and tribulations they are encountering along the way, not to mention when they actually get there. And I know that this is probably going to be an easy read. It's probably going to be a fun time. That's not necessarily what I'm looking for in my fantasy. I really want to connect to the characters and get emotionally invested. I want there to be a deep storyline, and I'm not entirely sure if I'm going to get that. So I was 50 pages in, and I wasn't necessarily enjoying it, right? It was that easy read, but it wasn't something that I was intrigued enough to continue. And again, this is a situation where I don't know if it's a book thing or a me thing. Like maybe I'm just not in the right mood to pick this up. And so I'm having a difficult time like trying to determine what I'm actually going to read for this final prompt. One of the books I know that has been on there the longest is the next book in the Alex Carter series by Alice Henderson. The 4th book I think only just came out this year, but I knew about it way back in like 2022 when I redid all of the lists. And so that is on there, but I don't think that I want to read it. I don't think I want to read it right now. I don't think I'm in a place to read it right now, because the last time I went into a book from that series, I didn't enjoy it as much as the first 2. And I really want to be sure that I'm in a place where if I don't enjoy the book, it is because of the book and it is not because of me. So again, I'm kind of struggling to determine what I actually want to pick up for this prompt. And I want to be as authentic as I can. I want to pick up a book that I know that I'm going to be able to read in a timely manner, but is also one that's one of the oldest on my TBR. I'm going to see what I can come up with for this. And of course, after I have started it, I will let you know. Y'all, I'm a liar. I am a big fat liar face, because I specifically sat here and told you that for the Orilium prompt of reading a TBR veteran, a book that's been on my TBR for a really long time, I was not going to be reading the next book in the Dr. Alex Carter series by Alice Henderson. And what book am I currently reading? The next book in the Dr. Alex Carter series by Alice Henderson. I was having a really hard time figuring out what I wanted to read for this prompt, because as I believe I mentioned, I completely redid my Goodreads to be read list. And because of that, I couldn't necessarily know with any certainty what books were the oldest, because they all had like a roughly similar timeline for being added. But I did sort my list by date added, and there were a handful of books that popped up, one of which being the Dr. Alex Carter book. And I said I wasn't ready to read that because when I read book 3, it was kind of a disappointment. And I don't know whether that was a me thing or a book thing. I am changing as a reader, and that could be a reflection of me changing as a reader, but I was not ready to admit that because I am such a fan of the series. I think it is such a solid suspense series that adds an educational element to it, which I will talk about in just a second. And so I really wanted to be sure that that before I went into book 4, I was really ready to read it, that I was in the mood to read it, that there was no way that if this book was a disappointment, it was a me thing and not a book thing. You know what I mean? And I was sitting at work trying to figure out what I was going to read for this. And I realized that this was my best option because the other options were the next book in the Stormlight Archive series, which was not going to happen. There's no way I could take the time to dedicate to that story. Otherwise, it was going to take me a couple of additional months to read that. And there wouldn't be really anything I could say in this vlog, right? Because it is the second book in a high epic fantasy series. And I have so many other fantasies that I need to read. So I was like, that's out. Then there was a nonfiction that I know has been on my TBR for a really long time. It's about women in the CIA. And I am still really interested in that one. And I thought, you know what? Let's go ahead and do that because that will also satisfy the Herkied nonfiction prompt. But I started to think about it and I was like, you know what? I'm still in the middle of Alexander Hamilton by Ron Chernow. That's a big, chunky, dense nonfiction biography. I just got done with the historical fiction. I'm about to go into a literary fiction and I really need something that's going to be a little bit mindless, that's going to be kind of like a palate cleanser. And this book, which is called The Vanishing Kind, was really one of my only options. And I was like, you know what? I think that I am in the mood for it. I think I am in the space to enjoy this story. So let's go ahead and give it a try. And I'm so thankful to say that so far I'm nearing about the 35-40% mark. I am really enjoying this one more than I did book 3. So if you're not familiar, this series follows, of course, Dr. Alex Carter, who is a wildlife biologist, and she specifically focuses on conservation of endangered species. So she is consistently being sent to these very remote locations to try to detect the presence of a specific endangered species, to determine their habitat, to see if there's something that they can do to protect the area that is their habitat. So in this book, she's being sent to New Mexico, to this area preserve, to see if she can detect the presence of jaguars, which are very, very much critically endangered within the United States for a variety of reasons. And she wants to see if she can detect the presence there to see maybe how they can protect that area for the jaguar, right? And something else to know about these books is that she is typically always put into these very, very dangerous situations. There's typically people who don't want her there for a variety of reasons, or she just gets caught up in the middle of something else and her life is typically in danger, which is what makes these very suspenseful. And truthfully, I do find these to be pretty intense, pretty high stakes, especially because there could potentially be animal lives involved, right? So for like, as an example, in this book, the nature preserve borders the land of a big game hunter. And so I think that that's going to come into play a little bit. Also, on this big game hunter's land is an archaeological dig, and I'm not sure how that's going to quite play into the story. There's also a lot of conflict in this area right now between these anti-immigrant neo-Nazi white supremacists and the local population, and they are causing a lot of problems for them. And again, I don't know how that's going to play into the story. We haven't gotten into the actual suspense part of this. I will say that these books are typically slow burn leading up to the suspense because we start with Alex like getting to the area, getting to know the people, getting to know the land, right? Surveying the land, putting her cameras out. We get a really big education on the animals involved in the story. That's the educational aspect, right? So right now we are learning definitely a lot about the animals, their habitat, their habits, how they typically live and eat and roam and all of that stuff. And I find it incredibly fascinating. But of course, as part of this, we are also learning the threats to these animals. And that's primarily humans and what we do to cause the endangerment of these animals. So like in this one, we are definitely learning a lot about habitat destruction for the commercial animal agriculture industry, the beef industry, the ranching, right? And it's a natural part of the story, right? We are learning about the jaguars. We are learning about what threatens them. And so naturally, we are learning about how humans are a big, big part of that. So it doesn't really come off sounding preachy. It's not shoved down your throat. Y'all know that I don't love social commentary in my books, even social commentary that I 100% agree with. I don't really want it to be super preachy, but that is not what this does. That is not what this does at all. It's a very, very natural part of the story as we are learning about what Alex is doing and the jaguars and things like that. And I do think that it's really, really important. And I hope that people who are reading these books are kind of taking it to heart, right? They are absorbing it in a way that could potentially be beneficial to the wildlife that we are trying to preserve. So that's another reason why this series really means a lot to me. I think it is really important on top of giving you that suspenseful experience that you are looking for. I have really, really enjoyed this. I know other people who I have turned on to the series have really enjoyed it as well. And so I'm glad to be back with Alex, and I really hope that this stays strong. I think that I might be finishing it today, if not today, early tomorrow morning. It's not a very long audiobook at all. It's only about 10 hours. And so on 2x speed, I can typically listen to it in about a day, day and a half. And like I said, I am nearing the 40% mark. So that's why I wanted to come on here and update you, because I don't know if I'm going to have another opportunity to update you before I actually finish the story. Anyway, y'all, as per usual, I am sitting here filming this right before work. And so I need to finish getting ready, feed the dogs, get out the door. But I will come on here when I have finished The Vanishing Kind by Alice Henderson and officially close out this next round of Orilium. Good morning, everyone. I am here to wrap up this vlog because we have officially finished the August Equinox 2022 round of the magical readathon, because I have finished The Vanishing Kind by Alice Henderson. And I am so thankful to say that I really, really enjoyed this one. I am not entirely sure what it was about book 3 that didn't really work for me, but my experience with book 4 was more reminiscent of my experience with book 1 and into. And in fact, I would say that I enjoyed this one as much, if not more, than those first two stories. And I'm so grateful because I was worried that this story was going to go downhill. Now, this series definitely follows a formula, right? You have Alex Carter, who is being sent on an assignment to help with conservation of a specific species. And so she's often sent to these very, very remote locations that are some distance away from towns that don't often have cell service and everything like that. So she's usually on her own. She typically finds herself in the middle of some kind of danger that threatens her life. And in this instance, it was an anti-immigration white supremacist group that posed the most danger to her. There was also like a side subplot with regard to that archaeological dig on the property of a big game hunter. And that does tie in somewhat, but it is ultimately separate from the primary danger that accosted her. And so you are following her as she is fighting for her life within these scenarios, right? And I actually find these stories to be very intense and very high stakes. It is a slow build. And then once it actually gets to the height of the danger, I do find these to be very, very high stakes. And there is typically some threat to the animals involved because she is trying to save jaguars and there are people in this area who are trying to hunt that jaguar. And so I'm always like a little bit on edge about what is actually going to happen to the animal. But I'm really thankful because Alice Henderson herself is very much involved in wildlife conservation. I do also think that it's worthwhile to kind of read the author's note because that's where she gets really more into what is happening with the species and what we as people can do to help protect them since we are the ones that are causing these dangers. You know what I mean? And I appreciate that as somebody who is very much into animal welfare and safety and wildlife conservation. And as somebody who does try to be as sustainable as I possibly can in the environment in which I live, I really appreciate the message of these books. I cannot recommend these stories enough. I honestly don't know why more people are not reading them because I do think that they are really solid stories. And I do know that she is working on book 5 at the moment. And I'm excited to just kind of keep going and seeing what Alex gets into because I am having a great time with this series. But yeah, y'all, that's it. We finally made it to the end of this round. I hope that you are enjoying and are sticking with me on this journey. If you have made it to the end of this video and you are not feeling chatty, go ahead and leave me a jaguar emoji or, you know, like a big cat emoji in honor of The Vanishing Kind by Alice Henderson. And as always, if you like this video or if you just like me, please be sure to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. I typically post 2 videos a week, one on Wednesdays, one on Sundays, and I would love to connect with you in any of those future videos. Or if you'd prefer to connect with me outside of BookTube, you can always find links to my Goodreads, Instagram, Patreon, and YouTube memberships down below, along with any books featured in the video. Until next time, y'all. Bye.